This is like one of those games where like within 5 minutes of playing it, I had the Ratatouille experience, right? There's from the end of that movie where the critic tries the food and it's like sends him back to his childhood. So the last one of these, so this is actually technically the fourth game in a specific series that was called Sparking in Japan way back in the day on the PS2 and like the Wii that these games came out. But in the West, it was Budokai Tenkaichi. It's one, two, three. I think the first one was only on PS2, and I think the second and third one were PlayStation 2 and the Wii. So I mean, I was one of the kids. I had the Wiimotes, you physically doing the Kamehameha on your living room to make the controls work. And this just brought me right back into that. This is a big 3D arena fighter, right? So unlike something like Dragon Ball Fighters from 2018, where that's like more of a traditional side to side 2D fighting game. This is like these, big, huge maps. You're zipping around the environment. You can destroy just massive portions of the area, or you can even turn it into a completely different area with a big enough, powerful attack. Um, and it's definitely like if you are looking at this to come into it like mechanically as like a fighting game, it's not going to be as complicated as like a Dragon Ball Fighters or a Mortal Kombat or a Street Fighter. Arena fighters tend to be on the simpler side. There's like you have an attack button, like energy blast, and then you got your special moves. You pull up with a trigger button, and then you hit those same two buttons to do your different specials. So it's a very simple game, and it can be a game that is very easy to kind of cheese in terms of the mechanics. But I will say it does actually have a little bit more going on than the original three games from back in the day. And what makes this different from those is there is a slightly more complicated system of counterattacks in this game. So there's two different versions of a counter here. One of them uses your energy, one doesn't. But it is that like you disappear and vanish and appear right behind the opponent. And like you can get into like a series of counters where it's like 10 to 15 of these in a row where each player is just instantly countering and vanishing behind the other player. And that's where it does start to get a little more complicated or a little more difficult, especially if you go and play online. Like a lot of the matches are just people counter, 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 counter. Like that's almost becomes the match at a certain point. Of course, you do run out of energy as you do it, so like there is a limit. It can't just go on forever. But it is amazing to watch some of these fights. Like they're cinematic looking. Like they really have this very larger than life, very cinematic presentation. A lot of the special moves have like kind of little cutscenes as you do them, and even special cutscenes that'll trigger if you use a certain move against a certain enemy, or if they have a certain amount of health, it'll trigger certain. So there's a lot of like little details like that, trying to replicating moments from the show. But it really looks like how they fight. Like it really replicates the kind of visual style of how the fights are animated right within the series. Now, like I've mentioned about a couple of reviews before, I'm not the biggest fan of like the actual anime, but I have been a pretty big player of the games since I was a kid. So I played probably maybe missed one or two, but I've played most of the Dragon Ball games that have probably come out at this point, at least on consoles. And Dragon Ball Fighters is kind of the king of like the 2D style. This is kind of, I would say, takes that same title and role for the 3D style games. Now, arena fighters are an interesting area in the video game industry because, like, almost every anime fighting or like anime video game that comes out is an arena fighter. And typically, I think people are pretty sketchy and distrustful towards the idea of an arena fighter. These big open area games where it's very much about just like the the look of the show and then kind of fan service, right? And most arena fighters, admittedly, I don't think are very good. As a genre, it's generally just one that's there's not a lot of effort put into. It's something that kind of tends to get by on iconography and just kind of simple fan service. But for whatever reason, it seems like Dragon Ball and this particular Sparking series, or Budokai Tenkaichi, again going by the old name in the West, seems like an exception to that rule, where these really stand out from the genre as just being more polished, just feeling better to play. They're just smoother. In terms of like the performance of this game, I really didn't have any issues. It was very smooth, very fast. I mean, it takes like 2 seconds to get into a match. There's so many particle effects and things exploding and the environment coming apart on screen pretty much all the time. But the game never slows down. The frame rate never drops. Like it's very smooth. It runs very consistently. Um, and then that's also to bring to just how much this game has in it. I think it launched with 180 playable characters.
Yeah, 182. Yeah.
I mean, that is a massive roster. I mean, and you do have some characters that are like doubles of each other that play a little similarly, but I'll also say this game versus the first three, uh, I think this actually differentiates the characters the most out of any of these games. Though especially like the old ones on the Wii and the PS2, those really would feel like okay, there's probably it's still a lot, but there's probably 50, 60 of these characters that feel truly different. And then there's probably like 50, 60 that feel like clones. Here, I think it's probably more like only 20, 30 of the characters start to feel like clones or start to feel like repetitive of how other characters play. So I think they've actually impressively improved how different everybody feels. Instead of it kind of being like, yeah, it's the same basic thing, you just have a different skin on, or it looks a little different when you use a special attack. They've actually done a better job at making it. I feel like I actually have to play the game a little differently depending on what character I am. So that's a big improvement, which to me puts it over as the best in this franchise, um, at least so far. And there's going to be a bunch of DLC too, so there'll be a bunch more characters. I'm hoping for more stages. That's one criticism I will say. I don't think there is as many stages, like levels, environments in this game as there could be. I remember playing the older ones, and there were so many levels and different areas that they'd pull from. Even like all the non-canon movies, like there are all these other environments that you could go into. And here it's like there's still a decent number of stages. It's not like a tiny number, but it feels like maybe a little underwhelming for just how many environments that this franchise has in it. So that's one thing that could be a little better. Hopefully they'll add to it over time. And then that brings me to probably the last like really big point is the story mode for this game, which if you played any Dragon Ball games, they've covered the story of the anime, at least a Cliff Notes version of it, like a million times in these different games. So you're getting that again here. And the presentation maybe isn't as grand or as impressive with the story mode as other versions. I've seen it done with a little bit more impressive presentation before. Here, sometimes you get some cutscenes that really have movement and really have more emotion on the characters. But there's also a good chunk of the story mode where it kind of feels like a bit more of a slideshow. We're just covering like, all right, character, dialogue card, dialogue card, dialogue card, maybe like a 30-second cutscene of something, dialogue card, dialogue card. All right, now you're playing it. So that can be a little basic if you're looking for like the story part of the series. That's not really probably the best place to get that. But again, like I said, I think there's been so many games that have covered the story that at this point, it's like to me that seems like a last priority in
Mm.
how these games are done. Like I feel like that's the least interesting thing about them. But there's a couple things that are new here. Is one, it's the first game to do like stuff from the Super series, which I'm like kind of familiar with. Like again, some Cliff Note C versions of it, but I'm not intimately familiar with the details. So there was some stuff that was kind of new for me, and some of the presentation is a little higher for that particular chunk of the game's story mode. And maybe that's because it hasn't been adapted before, so they wanted to spend a little more time on it. But the best part of the story mode, what's the most impressive part, is they have this whole, they call them sparking episodes. It's this whole like what if kind of type scenario. So, like, just to give you an example, right at the beginning, like pretty much the first fight, when you go to fight Raditz, right in the first stage, you can turn Piccolo's health down and say, "Oh, I don't want you to come with. Don't help me." And then you can go fight Raditz alone. And if you manage to actually like win the fight within like a certain amount of time, it'll offshoot you into like a completely different series of missions. It's like a what if storyline where it just totally changes the trajectory of what's happening, what characters are involved with what fights. Like you can if you do that, you win that fight with Raditz, Goku doesn't die, so he is not training in the afterlife. So when Vegeta and Nappa show up a year later, he's just alive, so no one dies. He beats them by himself. Then Frieza ends up coming to Earth instead of them going to Namek at all. So like you still get some a certain there's still the same characters and still some broad elements that play out somewhat similarly, but like the setting will change, who's on what side will change, what characters are involved will change, who's dying will change. And that's actually probably the most fun part of the story. And I think this part that where there's the most cutscenes and the most presentation is in these kind of what if scenarios. And there's a bunch of them too. And then the story is also set up where it's like you have Goku's story mode, and then you have Vegeta's story mode, and you have Gohan's story mode, and Piccolo's got a story mode. So you have all these different story modes. You have to work your way through one at a time. Goku's is by far the longest. And that also means he's got the most of these what if scenarios. So there's like a good like 6 or 7 points along his story where if you just do a fight slightly differently or win it within a certain amount of time, it'll just completely shoot you off into a whole another story mode with a whole different series of missions. That's a really, really cool element of this game.
Okay. Yeah. So from what I heard with the what if story modes, I was watching one review, and they were saying that it really is it's an interesting concept, but they don't do enough with it because they were saying like even though the what if scenarios give you like a choice and can branch off in a different path, they kind of just end up where the original story goes anyway. So it's really not that really fascinating there.
Some of them do, but I think some of them do change the way things play out. I think in interesting. And the other thing is there's a lot of them, and there's like they're hidden too. So like they're not all obvious. Like there are moments when there's a choice given to you, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, let me see, let me make this obvious decision about, and then like we'll see how that plays out. But then there are other ones, like several that I managed to just completely by accident walk my way into by beating a fight like just particularly fast. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing this, and then it just started setting me down another pathway. Um, could there be more done with them? I mean, sure. But I thought they did a pretty fun job. I would say it's as they do as good of a job with it as like the Marvel What If cartoon does.
Mm, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Marvel what if stuff. Yeah. What if
Yeah, it's
yeah.
silly and it's like not something to take seriously necessarily, but I think it's a fun thing. And if you've played so many of these games and you've seen this exact same story play out in video game form so many times, I think it's a nice and worthwhile thing to have in there just to make it feel a little fresh, a little new, and feel like you're not running through the exact same thing.
Mm, okay. And you mentioned so this is a big roster, but a lot of people also mentioned that a lot of that roster is bolstered by a lot of the variations of the different characters. So, like, there's Goku, there's base Goku, there's Super Saiyan Goku, the Super Saiyan 2 Goku, 3. There's Gogeta, Vegito, there's Ultra Instinct Goku. This is all these different variations
They
of
even got the GT versions in too.
the GT versions as well there. And you mentioned so they all play kind of differently from each other. I don't think
I would say more so than the old games. Like
okay.
in the old games, it was like these characters were just straight up clones, and they have a different colored energy beam, and they look like the character's costume or skin looks different. I think here, like some of them still play the same. Like there's still characters that do have that feel to them, because again, I mean, it's 180 characters, and it's probably a little unavoidable that some of them are going to feel repetitive of each other. But I do think that they here this is the best of so if this is a four-game franchise, this game by far of the four does the best job at making those characters play at least a little bit differently from each other.
Okay. Did you play? Do you think it's also similar to like Fighters? You think it's also Fighters did a good
Oh,
job? Better.
it's a completely different kind of game. It's honestly, other than them being both based on Dragon Ball, like there's almost no similarities between them. Whereas like Fighters is a true like to me, Dragon Ball Fighters is like the kind of true successor to the like Marvel versus Capcom franchise. And the characters in that game, even though like yeah, you'll have a bunch of different Gokus, in that game, they truly all play completely different from each other in fighters. Like none of the characters play the same. It feels like loading up a Mortal Kombat where like everybody plays differently, or a Street Fighter where everybody plays differently, or a Marvel versus Capcom where like you there really is a even if it's a Goku and then another Goku, they they in that game they feel like 100% like different characters in terms of their move sets and how you have to play them. Like if you master one of them and then you pick a different one and you're like, oh, I'm good at the other one. I'll just play as one of these other versions and I'll be great. No, you'll get your ass kicked. That game is like, yeah, that game mastered having like multiples of characters and yet still making them all completely distinct. This game does not make them nearly as distinct as that does. But like I said, it's also just it's such a different style of game. Um, with a 3D arena fighter like this, there is more sameness to certain ways the characters move or how you execute certain attacks. But I'd say where this does manage to successfully differentiate better than like Budokai Tenkaichi 1, 2, or 3 is the way in which you have to position yourself for your attacks to be successful. I think that's kind of the key difference. So, one character you'll have an ultimate attack that's like a energy beam type thing, but it's interruptible unless you hit them or unless you kind of knock them to the side and then do it while they're moving. And then another character's energy beam attack is maybe going to be a successful hit from further away. Or, there's kind of those small differences. Now, again, those do repeat still. These characters definitely don't feel as different as they do in like fighters. But I still think that it's as far as like an evolution of the previous games within the same series, I think this has done the best job of making them different.
Okay. Very nice. Yeah. And this is getting decent scores kind of around there. For Dragon Ball Sparking Zero there. What would you say is the weakest element of the game?
I think it's probably like I was mentioning. I think there's a lot of kind of story presentation that's just not like the greatest. There's a lot of like slideshow stuff and just like, oh, let me read these text box instead of the characters being voiced at all times or having like a cutscene to show things happening a lot.
You think they do it
Um,
to like save money, something like that? Save money, kind of release the game faster.
it could be that. I think it also is probably just that they've done how many Dragon Ball games that have shown the story already. And I think part of it might just be that it might just be a matter of like, well, why spend money on that when people have seen it 8 million times, and we could put money in having more characters or having the graphics look better, or So like I think it's an understandable weak point, but a weak point nonetheless. And then I also do think that the stage selection could be a lot stronger. I think there's only I mean, there's like 10 or so different stages, and they all have like nighttime, daytime, like evening variations or whatever, or like destroyed variations, like Namek. You have the actual Namek planet, and then you have like the on fire exploding version of the world from their
Uh,
final fight.
Says here there's 12 stages.
12 stages. Okay.
The
So,
base
so I
game
mean,
includes
that's
12 stages.
okay. Well, and that's still like a decent number of stages too, right? Like that's not necessarily small by most fighting game standards. But just looking back on again, just on the older games within this series, like Budokai Tenkaichi 3, I remember, like you have the weird jelly bean hell from the movie with Janemba. And there were a lot of just other environments I remember from those games. Like I just remember the stage selection having a bunch of very weird, distinct spots. And maybe it's smaller than I remember too. I
Budokai
don't know. Maybe I'm
Tenkaichi
mistaking.
3 that had 20 stages,
Yeah,
20 battle stages.
20 stages. Okay, so that's for a game that came out in 2007, it had an additional eight stages compared to this one. And then, like I said, I think that'll probably be DLC in the future. They'll probably add stuff to that to make that work better. But as of right now, I get that's maybe one point of disappointment that I was like, oh, it'd just be nice to have more environments to run around in, because like them just doing like once you've totally finished with the story, um, and I'm not like the biggest online player, like I've mentioned many times on here on the show. So like for me, I'm gonna be playing like friends on split screen mode, sitting next to me on the couch. Not so much going online playing other people because I can win against all my friends. um, no, but also just I think having those stages it just keeps the game fresher for longer. The more stages you can have, it gives you something different to look at more frequently. So
Yeah.
that I'd say, yeah, story presentation and kind of stage level environments are probably the weakest points.
Okay. So people were comparing also the look of the game to bringing up. We were talking about fighters a little bit earlier, and I love the way the fighters looked. I think they translate that anime style very well. But some people say that this game, Sparking Zero, looks better than fighters. What do you think?
Um,
Just comparing it
it's
because that was the last
yeah,
Dragon Ball game
that
that we
was the
played.
last big Dragon Ball game. It's interesting. I think they're going for slightly different styles. Um, like I think this game is going for a fully 3D look, like fully 3D video game graphic look, and I think it's the best looking like fully 3D look that a Dragon Ball game has ever had. But I think I still think Fighters maybe looks just a tiny bit better. But I also think I would say that Fighters is trying to make it look exactly 2D. Like Fighters is really trying to show to kind of almost trick your eyes into thinking you're looking at a 2D drawing. And so I think Fighters maybe I like just a little more in that aesthetic. But I think they're close. I think they're very close. I guess it's just a matter of do you prefer one that really kind of replicates a almost hand-drawn style and one that leans into being a 3D video game graphic style.
So this video, it shows kind of back to back. It's showing the moves from fighters and the moves from Sparking Zero there. Yeah, so this is the one from fighters, and then this is the one from Sparking Zero. So it's pretty similar. It's very
Yeah,
similar.
it's close. I think I think Sparking Zero just or I mean I think Fighters just it looks a little more like it's actually hand drawn,
Mm,
you know?
yeah.
And then Sparking Zero looks a little bit more like, oh, that's a 3D video game model. They both look great, and I'd say they're very it's very close in terms of which ones like that are on a technical level. I think they're kind of right around the same level. But I do prefer the aesthetic of it mimicking like a hand drawn image.
Oh, lost Sage there real quick. Oh, there we go.
Cut out there.
Yep, cut out for a little bit there. You were saying? I'm sorry.
I was just saying, I think I prefer just the tiny bit like more kind of hand-drawn appearance that Fighters has. But they're very, very close. I mean, Sparking Zero might have better graphics, like overall, just more particle effects, higher resolution.
Mhm.
But I think Fighters just being that kind of the fact that it looks like it's a hand-drawn image, I think just gives it a tiny edge for me. But it's a stylistic preference at that point.
Yeah. I think both look good. Both look really good there. They're both beautiful. Both beautiful women.
Yeah.
You know, why pit two bad beautiful women against each other? Both great. So a big controversy with this game.
Oh,
Apparent
controversy.
apparently
Hands, bro. You don't understand. I'm him.
Oh.
I'm
apparently
yeah. One sec. One sec.
that's been much talked about this game. Some people said it's too hard, it's too difficult. Um,
Uh,
yeah. What's your
my
opinion
bad, man.
there on it?
People need to get good, man. Get good. I'm sorry. I didn't think that was even a little bit difficult. That grade 8 Vegeta fight. I cleared that on the first try. I didn't understand what. Here's the thing. I think there's a disconnect where I think a lot of people are rushing past the tutorial because they're like, "Oh, this isn't a complicated game. I know how to play this. Skip the tutorial. I don't need to spend time practicing. Take a second, play the tutorial." I think if you do that, I think you'll be fine. I think a lot of people are just rushing into it because if they're hyped up, they want to play the game. They don't want to sit there and play like a slow paced tutorial. They want to get into the game and play like a real match, play the story, you know? Um, and I think it's people's antsiness to get right into it that I think is probably having that effect. There's guides and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just, yeah, I didn't think it was that hard. I really didn't.
Yeah. Is there anything you think about that's slightly tricky about it, I guess? I mean, is this like is
I
it
mean,
his special move, Great Ape Vegeta? Is like
he's,
that's
I
what's
mean, he definitely like go. Well, see, okay, so here's the mistake. Going right up to him immediately isn't the smartest thing, um, unless you are really really good at the dodging. And so that's again where I'm like, just play the tutorial, learn how to do the counter attacks and the dodges. Because if you can kind of figure that out, I think that's the trick. Just figure out how to do the dodging moves. Like really get like decently precise with those. Because I mean, like this fight, like he does hit for a lot of health, right? Like if he actually starts grabbing you or hitting you a lot, your
yeah.
health will go down pretty quick. So it is like he does take big chunks off. I just think if you just take a few minutes to play the tutorial, I don't think it's that hard to avoid his attacks in the first place.
Mm, okay. Say he says get good, people, with
I get good,
Dragon
man.
Ball.
I'm sorry. It's a get good on this one. I'm not normally not that guy because I'm like, yeah, you know, everybody's got their own skill level, but I thought this was like very easy. There's some fights later in the story mode that I did think were a little tougher. There's during one of the what if scenarios. There's a fight where you have to fight like 5 or 6 characters in a single fight and you don't get your health back in between.
Mm,
That could be a little tricky. Um, and then like some of the Goku Black and like Zamasu fights from like the super parts of the story. Some of those I thought were a little tricky because I don't know those characters again they just hit for a lot of health, and you do have to fight like multiple enemies in a row without getting your health back. And sometimes that could be that those parts can be a little tricky. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that Great Ape Vegeta fight that practically felt like it was still part of the tutorial baby mode.
damn. So yeah. And you can adjust the difficulty on it, right? You can go.
Yeah, you
What's
can
the
turn the
highest?
difficulty on.
Yeah. What's the highest?
I think it's just an easy, normal, hard.
Okay. No, like Super Saiyan or anything like they don't title it. No
I,
Dragon Ball stuff like that, or
I don't think so. I'll double check, but I'm pretty
just
sure it was
like
just your basic stuff.
okay. Yeah. So very hard, hard, normal, easy, very easy, kind of like that.
Yeah, yeah, difficulty, weak, normal, strong, or super.
Okay.
So
All right.
there's a very hard, but that doesn't go any higher than that.
Okay. Have you? What did you play it on?
I just played on standard, just normal.
Okay. Would you go back to Super?
I think I would, especially after playing a lot of it. I would totally bump up the difficulty and go back. Maybe if I bump the difficulty, then I'll see what people are talking about with that fight.
Yeah. And you said you didn't really play too much of the online mode. They're playing against other people, so there
I,
it is.
I jumped into a little bit just so I could talk about like as far as functionality. Connectivity is pretty good. It didn't take me more than like 2 minutes usually to find a match. Like I said, I didn't play a ton of online. That's just usually not my style of thing. But I wanted to at least get a sense of like whether it worked or not. Um, but you know, it seems really functional. It seems like the connectivity works really well. I wasn't running into issues where like sometimes games with online modes will launch and you'll sit in like a lobby forever waiting for a match to connect and it just never does. But
I heard a lot. There was an issue with a lot of people rage quitting. A lot of people rage quitting.
a lot of people are. So I've seen a lot of that. And it's funny because it's people that are playing as like Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta or Ultra Instinct Goku, and they're picking like the within the story the most powerful possible characters. And then as soon as they start to get their ass handed to them because they haven't actually learned how to play the game, they just rage quit the second that anyone that's actually like knows what they're doing starts beating their ass. And
Yeah,
it's honestly pretty funny.
yeah, like just a bunch of people rage quitting, I guess, on this game.
Which
So
I
yeah,
never understand. It's like take if I'm not that good at like any fighting games. I guarantee, like I might have been able to kick the story's ass, but I guarantee if I go play online, other players are gonna win. People are gonna total. I I've gone on every I try like every fighting game like a little bit online. I'm never that good at these, right? Just take your loss and accept it. It's okay. It's not the end of the world.
Hey,
You
you
can
gotta handle that
lose.
burner,
You
man.
can lose a fight.
this whole compilation.
What the fuck? Fuck! What the fuck is this ape ass nigga doing?
Jesus Christ. But yeah, it's a whole
People
compilation
get
here.
worked up, man.
Yeah.
People get really worked up over video games.
I gotta admit, I mean, this some Mortal Kombat matches that had me tight. I was like, man, I was like, because people spamming, and it's like, this shit had me tight, man. But yeah, very nice there. I can say a major rage quit compilation I've seen on Sparking Zero has been with the Ginyu guy. The
Oh,
person.
that's a funny one because you can do you switch bodies, right? So I've seen people go play with the Ginyu character, and they will let like, oh yeah, like Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, right? And they'll let that character pretty much get like win really close to winning. It's like Ginyu will have a single health point left, do the body change move, and then just like smack the other person once and win. So that's really funny.
uh, and then yes, the fighting games are such like that. You get your ass handed to you when you go on online after its
Oh,
story.
totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had that experience. I guarantee if I go online and play a bunch, I'm not going to win most of the matches. Most of the people are probably going to be way more skilled than I am at this, and it's okay. It's gonna be okay.
So what would be your rating for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero here?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Not being a fan of the anime, but being a fan of the games, I I I still have a lot of nostalgia for the older games, and that kind of feeds into how much I enjoy this because it is like a blast from the past to the old Tenkaichi games. Um, I'd give this like I think I'd say like a low peak because there are enough negatives, and I think it's like the style of game that isn't going to necessarily click for everybody. Um, and there are a couple negatives like story presentation and the stage. Maybe there not being as many stages as I wish there was. But just in terms of sheer fun, performance, the mechanics, the graphics, the visual flair of it all, and then just yeah, just having this just blast from the past fun to sit down and mess around with. So I give it like a low peak. So um, yeah, I'd say after I'd say a low peak is like an 8 out of 10.
Yeah. So yeah, 7.5, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd say I'm right around there. I think that's a fitting score for it. It's not going to be like, it's not going to overtake Silent Hill or Black Myth Wukong like Game of the Year or anything like that. But it'll probably be on my top 10 list. Like maybe it'll be number 10, but it'll get right around there.
Mm, okay. So a low peak for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. So that's about like like say you said, like 7.5, 8 out of 10 there, about around that territory. Yeah. So it's out right now. People can check it out there. Yeah. Would you say people pay full price, or would you say wait a little bit, or?
Um, I mean, for me, it was totally worth full price. But again, I have a certain amount of nostalgia for the older games, so that feeding into it, it's giving me this kind of extra boost in how much I'm enjoying it. If you've never played like one of these before, if you're not familiar with the style, or maybe you don't know that you're into this specific style of game, I could say maybe wait for a little bit of a price drop. Because these games they are expensive, and especially like there's like editions of this like that come with like the season pass that are like $100 or whatever. And I'd say you could wait till there's a drop in sale. I'm sure like the holiday season will kick in and there'll be some sales on like the PlayStation Store. So yeah, I'd say if you're like a huge fan of Dragon Ball and you know these games, I'd say it's worth it. But if you're like a more casual fan or maybe you're not familiar with the style, I'd wait for a sale.
Okay. Yeah. $70 full price there. Like most games are nowadays there. People can pick it up. And there is no crossplay with this. Fridays had crossplay, and there's no crossplay in this.
Yeah, that is one unfortunate thing. That would be nice to add. Maybe in the future at some point they'll add that in. But it does have offline split screen, which a lot of games don't have anymore. So that's really nice.
Hmm, okay. So yeah.